Some of you might have been to their event the other week. That third bullet point, I am a Derby fan, so apologies to any Forest fans in the room. We also lost last night, if that makes you feel a bit better. But yeah, so I've been working for myself since August last year. I took the plunge to launch my own business called Chapter, and I do social media strategy, consulting, training, coaching. And so yeah, the talk on community today, some of my experience first, very quickly. I've worked across all sorts of sectors, so SaaS, I've worked for tourism businesses, I've worked with house builders, I've worked with Access on the left. I was the one who launched Amelia Clark's charity, Same You, a few years ago. She had a massive brain injury around the first season of two brain injuries around the first season of Game of Thrones. So we at Tank were very fortunate to be invited to launch her charity, and I was the one doing the socials. That was very cool. Got to meet her mum, who's the nicest person in the world. Very small though, tiny, as you can. I also worked in-house at Blue Light Card, so I won't talk about that one too much, but I'm going to reference that in the presentation itself. Top right is my Instagram handle, so if you feel free to tag me in anything, and also grab any pictures you want throughout the session, and also this will be shared afterwards, so don't feel like you need to take a million notes if you want to reread it afterwards. So this talk is all about communities on social. So one thing I want to get across is the fact that this community doesn't have to be something as obvious and as great as what this is, what Built-in Knots is. This is obviously a fantastic community. I like to take that definition a bit further and actually use it when it applies to businesses as well. It's not just a case of having an obvious, open idea of a community. It could just be how you apply community to your business where you work or your idea that you're building. It's not just a sense of something obviously connected by where you are, who you're with, your audience, your demographics. It can be a bit more businessy, for want of a better phrase. So just to make this a bit more relevant, I believe any business can build an engaged community, whatever your sector, B2B or B2C. It's not just about who your audience is or their demographics or interests. It goes a bit deeper than that, which I'll get into as I go through the talk. So firstly, why do I feel so strongly about community on social? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is context, and the second is some learnings from my own career. The first bit being the context is I'm a big supporter of the 9-to-5 rule. So that, Jake, this is what I was hinted at, I was going to mention to you at the start. So if you've not heard of this in marketing, it's this definition. It sounds a bit dry, but just bear with it. So 95% of business clients are not in the market for goods and services at any one time. Now this comes from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute for Marketing Science, which is based in Australia, in Adelaide. Now, the reason why I'm a big believer in this is why this is so important is because when you actually see it visibly, this chart, which comes from LinkedIn, the majority of people on social media especially focus on that 5%. They're constantly trying to get people to buy their product or service. So they're talking to them like they're ready to buy right now. They're talking to them like they're going to buy this product tomorrow. And that might be a new house, it could be a car, it could be some trainers, or it could be some SaaS software, or it could be a new piece of accounting equipment, whatever it might be. But what we have to remember is the majority of people aren't ready to buy right now. That's the larger proportion of the audience. So if you just talk to people who you think are going to buy from you tomorrow, you're losing this huge amount of audience. So when you start to add value and create content that just gives an interesting point of view or shares your expertise or gives insight into something that your audience might find interesting, it makes you more memorable. And so when they are ready to buy in the future, they go from the 9-to-5 to the 5. So if you constantly think about just the 5% of your audience, you're missing out on the majority who do have the budget, but just might not have the budget right now. So once you start thinking about the bigger audience, you start to create social media content that's far more valuable and interesting, not just this product is launched, please buy it today. So the second point of why I believe in community so strongly comes down to my own learnings and my career. So for over 10 years, I worked in various agencies, including Tank in Nottingham, as I said. And I genuinely loved it, and I loved the people. As I've talking to a few people today, if you were here for Catherine's talk a few weeks ago at Tank, I'm a big friend of hers. And if you've never seen Rob Mayhew on LinkedIn, he's brilliant, does really great satire of agency life. And it's quite true. When you start a new job and realise some of these people will be in your life forever. I've got friends for life and I can't shake them, even though I don't want to. They might want to shake me sometimes. But I moved in-house in 2021. Like many people, I had a bit of a career kind of what do I want moment because of COVID. And I realised I wanted to try something different. And I went in-house to actually a client called Blue Light Card. And I was the senior digital marketing manager. That was me there. obviously. Blue Light Card is the UK's largest discount provider for NHS, police, fire, emergency services, armed forces, and also, just as I left, it added teachers in as well, which I was talking to Angelica about. And it's a brilliant company, brilliant. It's changed a bit, unfortunately, but when I was there, it was a fantastic organisation with a real purpose, and I was very fortunate to go and visit our members, doctors, nurses, police officers. I went to a prison for a day. It was for work. It wasn't for conviction or anything like that. That was a really interesting but strange experience. I was at the police station in London on the day the Queen died, and I knew I was in the way. So I said to the officers, I need to go because I'm just holding you up. All you guys are coming back from leave because something big is happening. I'm just stood here promoting Blue Light Card. But I did that. But it wasn't my remit. Wasn't to go and sell Blue Light Card. I wanted to go and learn about our audience, understand what the nuances were of a prison officer versus a nurse, what they shared, what they differed on. And that then informed my opinion of how I then approach social media as well. So, as you can imagine, with all those roles, they're a hugely diverse audience of so many different jobs. It's not just doctors and nurses, it's porters in the hospital, it's receptionists, it's administrators, it's anyone who's doing something very different. An armed forces person in the military is very different to a nurse, for example. So they're not just, they're very different in terms of demographics and interests, but actually they share a dedication to really challenging and often rewarding jobs that are definitely and unquestionably essential to society. And obviously all of us in this room have at some point had to use one or more of those services. Most of us when we were just born. But actually, if you've got children, or if you have to call the police for an incident, or you just have to talk to someone, and also now that Blue Light Card has teachers as well, we've all been through the education process. So they share something more than just, they're all men or women, or they've all got this age range, or they just have an interest in blah, blah, blah. Actually, they're united by something more because of their roles. So by going to these events, by meeting them, we were able to create an engaged community that went beyond just what we did, which was discounts. And I'll show you some examples later on. We didn't just always shout about 10% off at JD Sports or 5% off at Asda. It was more than that. We were able to create our audience and get them to be engaged by sharing content that was actually a bit more relevant to what they're interested in, not just what we were selling. And if you think back to that 9-to-5 rule, the 5% would essentially just be us promoting discounts all the time. But actually, we have to think a bit more laterally than that. And as it says there, we weren't sharing endless sales content. We were acting as a pivot, as a brand, and creating conversations that they could join in with. We were giving them a reason to feel part of our community. And we actually called it the Blue Light Community, which obviously gave us a really easy win to actually say, you guys are the Blue Light Community. You're not the NHS community, because that's over here. You're not emergency services, you're not armed forces, because they're all separate. But actually, when we start to call them something that united them, they could start to feel part of it as well. So it had a measurable impact as well. So from the social side of things, I was able to have an 18% increase in year-on-year organic engagements, over 150 million organic social media impressions in 3 years, with average year-on-year increase of 33%. That's really long-winded when you read it out. And it also had a business impact. Now that was harder to measure because of attribution, but I could see on the day where we shared something that was loosely related to an offer, I could then look in the back end and start to see increases in people downloading a discount code and then maybe making a purchase, or even just raising awareness of an offer and a brand. That was always a challenge internally, trying to find attribution. It's a challenge for most businesses, but it was nice to see that we could see spikes around big engagements and activity. We actually, that little Lego figure, we actually got to work with a police officer who had an Instagram account called Brick Cop. We actually met him, and he was anonymous, but he came to visit our office, and really interesting account. And he actually made some Lego figurines featuring mini Blue Light Cards. That was a nice little treat for us. Another great piece of content, actually. So then, because of all this, and yes, I was very lucky to have a sector where it had such a real clear purpose, but actually it gave me the belief that it can work in other sectors. And what I'm going to show you shortly is some examples of how that does work, and also how you can make it work for your businesses as well. But more importantly, before we get there, why does any of this matter? And why should brands care and companies, and why should you care as people who are potentially leading on the social media side of things, or even just thinking about your business and how you might talk to your marketing people, or if you're working for yourself, how you can do it for yourself as well. Now, here's some facts to back that up. So 58% of consumers report discovering new businesses via social media. It's a really great place to understand and find new businesses, new things that interest us, whether that's I'm going to pick on Oliver because he's here for Not's Happening, but let's find a new restaurant you're going to visit or a new bar in Nottingham, or it's a new piece of software that you need for your business. If people are posting interesting content that makes your life, sparks something in your brain, think, oh, that's interesting, I'll remember that. That's a great starting point. Ooh. And this was from Spark Taro, which is a really great research website founded by Rand Fishkin, who founded SEO Moz way back when. And as you can see, search and social are the two huge, much largest parts of that pie, which show you the most visited websites in the world. Now, this is just web data, it's not app data. But as you can see, social media still plays a huge part in our lives. And if you're out there posting content that's increasing visibility of your company or you as an individual, social media is a great place to do that. And as I'll keep saying throughout, if you're bearing in mind that 95-5 rule, if you're posting value and creating interest, it makes you more memorable. Connection. More than 3/4 of consumers say they would buy from a brand they feel connected to over a competitor. That's where you start to feel, we've all got brands that we like that make us feel something, whether it's you'd like Ryanair's recent social media content or Aldi or whoever it might be. They also don't have to be huge organizations. It's easy to say the biggest ones are the best, but they're not. They have the most budget. But, as an example, Built-in Knots has something that means something more than just it's what it is. It's actually we're connected by something because of we're either trying to build an app or we're trying to get an MVP off the ground, whatever it might be. But it's something more than just we all share the same demographics or interests. We're actually connected by something slightly different as well. When it comes to companies as well, loyalty is really important. If you engage with a brand on social media, they're 3 times more likely to be loyal. Again, that matters because we as companies and brands want people to buy from us more often. But also it means that we can think a little bit differently about the content. We're not just trying to get them to buy and move them on and get to the next one. We always hear stories about how retention, which is the next slide, is cheaper than acquisition. And if you've got an active online community, they experience a 53% higher customer retention rate. So again, linking back to what I said at the start, community doesn't just have to be an obvious, definition of that's clearly a community of tech people or finance people or just people who like a particular football team. It can be based around a business as well. So what I want you to try and think of when I go through this presentation is my business can be the center of a community. It doesn't have to be an obvious one that's always going to be the most followed or the most liked in the world. It could just be 100 people, 500 people, 1,000 people. But you can connect, you can build an audience of people based more than just demographics or interests and therefore retain them as customers. So what we were able to do by listening and learning, going to prisons, going to hospitals, asking questions of our customers, of our members, sorry, they weren't customers. Well, they were technically, but we called them members, was to understand, test and refine what worked for our audiences. And so what I now believe is this can come down to 4 key headings when it comes to social media and building your own community. And I'll talk through each one. I'll show you all, sorry, and then I'll talk through each one with some examples. So the first one is go where belonging already exists. The second is understand the lived situations and shared experiences of your audience. The third is connect with your audience, don't just broadcast content, and that definitely links to the 95-5 rule. And the last one is validate through recognition. And I'll explain with examples each one. So the first one is go where belonging already exists. I want to pick on Asda here. As we all know, huge supermarket, one of the most followed on social media, on Facebook anyway. Now, Facebook to many people is a dead platform. It might be if you're launching a new business today, but if you've got the right demographics, it still has its place. It is still the largest social media platform. Asda use it brilliantly because they have over 2 million followers, and what they very rarely do is post about 2-for-1 offers, 50% off Easter eggs, or whatever else, what's now spring. Maybe they're starting to talk about getting your garden ready or getting your furniture, and then there's some of them talk about barbecue food, but they don't really do that. They do a lot more about their people, and I won't let you read all that, but Paul on the right is a delivery driver. Roger is a 77-year-old customer. Paul regularly delivers to Roger, went to deliver his food one day, noticed he wasn't answering the door, and as you can see in the second paragraph, he'd fallen over, banged his head and been on the floor for 9 hours. And Paul on the right was the chap who raised the alarm, called 999, and obviously, helped Roger out. Now that was shared with, and achieves 14,000 likes, 600 odd comments, 170 shares, and it's a great example of Asda using their Facebook channel to create a community of people who find their we all go to the supermarket, we might see the same faces. We might not be very chatty with them, but some people are. And this matters to people, especially when it comes to, something like an incident like this. And it goes on. This is a bit slightly different. This is one store in Enniskillen. You've got 7 couples there who all happen to work together in the same store. So it's something very different. But I'm sure people who go to that Asda will recognise whether it's George and Michelle and I said George, I thought it was her name. She works in the George section. Michelle and Glenn are a couple. You might recognise them because you're a regular visitor to that store, and it stands out to you. And again, the comments reflect that the people are really positive. And I haven't got the screenshots of the comments, but they're not people saying, "I bought a ready meal the other day and it was past its sell by date." It's positivity and it's great engagement, and also it makes Asda more memorable. When you think, "I need to go to the shops, I'm going to go to that Asda." This one is a bit closer to home. So this is Asda Derby. Emily's a first aider, and there was a 1-year-old who went pale limp and was drifting in and out of consciousness. So she raised the alarm, and again, really, especially for me as a parent, a really emotive moment. I can imagine that's horrible as a parent. You kind of go through that, and again, huge positivity. And it makes Asda more memorable. And what I find interesting about this is that I have occasionally waffled on about Asda on LinkedIn and shared my admiration for it. And it was my post was reshared by Claire Houghton. I don't know Claire. We're connected because of my post. But she reiterated, and she's the media relations manager, as you can see, and she reiterated the point that this is a kind of a definitive tactic they're doing to do something different with their social media channels. And as you can imagine, trying to get those stories is quite difficult, especially early on. But actually now that people are seeing the impact of them, it becomes more and more easy for them to generate those stories. Obviously, they're lucky with thousands of colleagues, which they call their employees, but it still hopefully raises some inspiration that we could achieve something different. Even if we have 5 customers or 5 colleagues, how can we do this to create a more human element of our brand? If our brand doesn't have that human element, how can we create it using our content? And obviously people is a great way of doing that. So the number 2 is a blue light card example. So this is lived situations and shared experiences. And one thing that was really interesting when it comes to the blue light community, as we called them, they have if anyone knows anyone who's a doctor, nurse, police officer, firefighter, armed forces, they have a really unique sense of humour because they have to have one to get through the day. Sometimes it's very dark, and even from my occasionally problematic sense of humour, their sense of humour was on another level. But what we wanted to make sure we did was we wanted, if we had some fun with them, we wanted to make sure we were having fun with them. We were never having fun at them because they're doing an incredible job. As I said to them, every time I met someone who worked in the community, you do a proper job, I do marketing. So we would ask a question like, what's your most embarrassing moment on shift? Because they would love to share their stories. They would tell us when they would come and meet us about various events. And so there'd be people, unfortunately in the comments, there's a lot of fluids that get mentioned, as you can imagine, in the hospitals. But lots of other entertaining stories when people who work in the armed forces, or someone who's even locked the car keys of the police car in the police car, because you can lock the car, unlike everyone else's car, you can generally do that. And one big thing that was in this industry, and it says at the end of the first line, there's a cake fine. So if you make a cock up in this community, you have to bring in a cake to the office. So a friend of mine who I managed at Blue Light Card now works for Leicestershire Police in a content role. And she said, it's so true. Every time there's an issue, there's just cake everywhere because someone's cocked up. But they find it really funny. It's like a nice way to, admit a mistake, but also have some fun with it. And you can take this a bit further. Who doesn't love an innuendo? What's something you only say at work? And as you can see, this one had 2,500 comments, and there was all sorts of things that people were trying to, relate to, funny things and lots of stories. Unfortunately, there's a lot of insertion and all this kind of stuff, but it was more to do with medical terminology, but it also has a bit of humour behind it as well. But the point was they were relating their real life stories, and we were able, again, acting as a pivot. We weren't being the ones to relay those stories back to them. We were saying, you tell us what goes on. And what it will also do for us is it will give us inspiration for future content. We could look through those comments and think, do you know what? This topic is really interesting. We could do more with that. So one example, there's 2 examples. One is pens would always go missing because doctors would steal pens from nurses. It was a common theme. Pens also has to be black ink because the other ink didn't photocopy. So the merch we would give out at events was always black ink. And these are little things that we learned along the way. The other one was that spoons, they could never find a spoon to make a cup of tea. So we actually did an April Fool's campaign. And I like this for 2 reasons. The one is because my birthday is on April 1st, which some people find hilarious. The second is we said we're going to launch a new Blue Light Card branded spoon set. And everyone was like, you need to do this. This is like a really good idea. So we actually then bought a load of spoons, branded them up and gave them out at events. And everyone was like, this is hilarious. This is really, these are going to be, and obviously from us as a brand point of view, we weren't trying to do it from a marketing point of view, but it's also have some blue light card labelled spoons in the drawers of hospitals or police stations is quite an interesting thing to do. But it gave us real ideas for future content. Then when we take it a little more businessy, when we link it back to what we do as a discount brand, we then start to have a little bit more fun, but we relate it back to what we do. So one example was this one where we do, the last place you use your blue light card is you have to shop for the whole of October. So some people were shopping in Asda, so they were fine. But if you're shopping in Halfords or you're shopping in JD Sports, you might look great, you might have a great bike, but you're not eating for that month. You might be eating, protein bars in Halfords or something like that, but that's about it. So again, as you can see with the engagement, just people were having fun with it and also linking it back to what they use as a discount. It also gives us some insight into what discounts were popular with people. As you can imagine, that time of year, it's not necessarily going to be holiday brands, but it might be back to school. So people might have been buying clothes for the kids and thinking, well, all I'm eating is, T-shirts this day, for example. So it was nice to have a bit of fun with it. And we were, again, subtly linking it back to the business. And then when we took it really businessy, and we would do sales content. So when I think back to that 95-5 rule, it doesn't say don't ever do sales content. It says know when the right time to do that is. This was one of those moments. So this was our Big Blue Weekend, which was essentially our version of Black Friday, but in the summer. Black Friday was our busiest time of year, but we know we wanted to create something that wasn't unique to us. It was unique to, it's not unique to anyone. We wanted to create our own version of that at another time of year. Obviously, from the people who were the commercial side of the business, their reason was to increase revenue. But also, it was to give back. The whole point of the business was to give back, give people discounts they couldn't get elsewhere. So by building up engagement on these kind of content, which might seem a bit frivolous occasionally, what you're then doing is creating awareness so the audience is engaged when you are launching a big thing like this. So this was the actual launch week. This was the teaser post for 2 weeks' time. So we would build that up over time. So when it came to the Friday, the 30th of June, we could then go big with that discount. And the engagement was really high. We're giving clear instructions on what's going on. But it's a very salesy post. But as you can see with the other stuff, we didn't just do that all the time. Now, occasionally I would have to have battles with internal teams, especially the ones who are getting the discounts, because they'd say, we've got a great discount at JD Sports, or we've got a great discount here. But how often can you buy a £200 pair of trainers for 10% off at JD Sports? Not very often. So there was always a little bit of internal battle, but generally speaking, we did usually agree. So the third point of my 4 is connecting, not just broadcasting. So what I wanted to do here was try and find a B2B example, because, and I was saying, me and Naomi were chatting earlier, B2B examples are often quite tricky to find because usually the niche of the audience, it's not always available when you're doing a search on the web. So you'll see, like, if you say who's really good at B2B on social, you'll see like people say HubSpot or whatever it might be. And obviously, Built in Knots is a great example of a B2B community. So there's 2 things with this. I'll talk through Square, but also if there's anyone who has ever seen any cool B2B communities, please let me know, because I'm always on the lookout for them, no matter how niche or small, because I think I always want to share real, more relatable examples than just a big B2C brand that I worked on and a big B2B brand as well.
Is that coming to like networking groups and stuff? Is that B2B is like business?
Yeah, business to business. Yeah, B2C is business to consumer. So that's a brand selling to you or I if we're going to buy, supermarket, trainers, whatever it might be. B2B is if you're going to buy software for your business, or you might buy some services from another one. That's the definition. So Square, they're a point of sale brand. You might have seen them when you've been buying in various shops. It's a very easy way to offer payments if you're a small business. This is from LinkedIn. So they use Cat's Deli as a case study. So that's the really famous deli in New York, which everyone gets a picture outside of, and make these like mega deli sandwiches. So they're showcasing their case study of how they support that business with their point of sale terminals, but they're doing it in a people's, this is the impact we have of the people who come and buy their lunch from this, and have been doing so for nearly 150 years. They also showed this Portrait Coffee, which was in the West End. I believe that's in Atlanta. So again, they're using a case study to talk about the impact of this business on its community. Particularly, it talks about care, culture, and community, from roasting and upstairs to pouring downstairs. It's showcasing the business side of things, and obviously how Square connects them together. And then because community is such a big thing for them, when they start doing a bit more of a campaign piece of content 4 million neighbourhood businesses running Square, and this was a video. They're showcasing the breadth of their business. So I wanted to make sure there was a B2B example in that, but it's always tricky trying to find niche examples. So if anyone doesn't see any, I'm always keen to pick them out and look at how they're using social media, because there's a bit of a fallacy that B2B businesses can't make social media work. You can make it work, but you don't always have to think in terms of sales or new product launches. It can be about the people in your business. It can be about what the customers using it, or even just what connects your audience. And I've got some examples of questions you can ask to find those answers later on. The final one is going back to Blue Light Card again. So validation through recognition. So validating our audience was a big part of making them feel like they were connected by something. This was a really great example of a video from BBC News. So this was during the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. So probably about a year, was it a few months before she died? And there was, huge celebrations on the streets. And this police officer was just walking around, giving his big, tall police hat to kids in the crowd and let them have pictures. And despite what people think about the police, that one individual can change people's perception. And we wanted to be recognised. We want, as the biggest community connected to this audience, we wanted to showcase that we appreciated that community spirit. And, it saw really good engagement at the time. This quote came from Afterlife, which was the Ricky Gervais show on Netflix, and it was a quote by one of the characters. Now, I don't want to spoil it if no one's not watched it, but there's a big part of the TV show was all about grief, and it had links to hospital. And this lady in the show gave this quote saying there are angels that they don't have wings and live in clouds. They wear nurses' uniforms and work hard to pay the rent on their houses. So I watched that program, and that's gold dust to me as a social media person. So I think that's a great piece of content. We actually shared that on Twitter, and Ricky Gervais himself retweeted it, which was obviously nice from a personal point of view, but also it's raising awareness that's resonated with our audience. Over 1,300 likes, hundreds of comments, lots of shares. They're making themselves feel connected. This was again super simple idea. This is me late at night when I probably should be asleep, thinking there'll be people working now, and I'm in bed. Like, surely I should do something about that. Literally just that. It's late, night shift staff. We see you. Thank you. Loads of likes. You can imagine in between breaks, they're looking at their phones, loads of comments. And then in the comments, it started to give loads of inspiration. People saying, oh yeah, do you know what? I'm on the night shift. I've got a packet of hobnobs to get me through the rest of the shift, or a can of Monster, whatever it might be. So we had a later post a few weeks later, which was, if you're on the night shift, what's your favourite snack of choice? Who doesn't love talking about their favourite snacks? There was loads of comments being like, these are the best biscuits, these are the best drinks. This is what, it's all these little things. And again, that's obviously unique to them, but what can be unique to your audience as well? And as I say, sometimes inspiration does strike you in the middle of the night. Then linking a bit more to the business again. So as you can see, we're building that audience up. We then start to do a little bit more salesy content. However, the beauty of this is we used to do a lot of competitions as a brand. And one of our content pillars was money can't buy type things, basically. What's the phrase? Gone completely blank. It'll come back to me. The idea of this was we would speak to our brand partners, so these are the brands who were giving discounts, and we would say, can you give us a prize? We want to give it away to our audience. The advantage is you're going to get loads of awareness, and people are going to remember that we do a really good Samsung discount. So we gave away, I won't read the whole definition of that TV, but a massive TV with great quality, and it's worth 1,300 quid. That's not affordable to many people who work in the blue light community. And our entry mechanism was comments. So as you can see, we had 14,000 comments. It's a huge competition. The dual benefit of that is it shows that we give away great prizes, and also it raises awareness of Samsung as a brand. And we used to give away about 70 to 80 grand's worth of product every year. And we just got that by asking our partners, can you give us a TV? Can you give us a KitchenAid mixer? Can you give us an air fryer? We used all sorts of things. We used to give away tickets to theme parks and everything. And also what would happen is I haven't done it for the screenshot because there's a lot of T's and C's in that post, but at the bottom it would also have a link to the offer. So people would then click on the Samsung offer and go, oh, right, you got 10% off phones, or you got 5% off this. That's interesting. I might need a new phone. Or next time I do need a new piece of technology, I remember the blue light card discount, and I will click on it when I need to buy. And then probably one that was real gold dust a few years ago was trying to get a ticket to the Eras tour. Now, unfortunately, we couldn't take advantage of that as a staff perk, but it would have been quite nice to go. But we had a partnership with Wembley, so we used to give away free tickets to events. And they were always in Club Wembley, so the nice middle bit of the stadium where you get the soft seats, you get food before the game or whatever, the concert. So we were giving away tickets to a Taylor Swift experience. And obviously that was really good engagement as well. So again, we're linking back to what we do as a business. I think they had a great time. Again, as I said, staff didn't get to go, which was a shame. So hopefully it's giving you some inspiration about what you could be doing with your social media audience, how you can turn it into a community, even if you might think, do you know, before this wasn't an obvious thought that could be a community, but actually it could be based on some ideas I've given you. But these questions are ones that I would often ask to understand what my community could be. Now, feel free to grab a picture, but I'll talk through a few that are just going to stand out. So firstly, the big one, top left, what do we already know about them? What are the things that we know about our audience already with their challenges? So Angelica, we were talking about, obviously your audience with teachers. What do we know about teachers already? Is it their challenges? Is it to do with pay? Is it to do with, what motivates them to be a teacher, for example, and how do you play on that? If you know this information already, that's great. If you don't, lots of other questions you can ask your audience. What do they always ask you? If you're talking to your customers or audience on a regular basis, what are the information that you ask all the time? This is often where, when you start working in bigger organizations, you can see a disconnect between the people who talk to customers and the people who do the marketing. And often, we as marketeers, or me anyway, it's my job to go and speak to the business development manager or the account manager or the customer service representative and say, what are customers actually saying to you all the time? If they're asking that regular question, then we need to use that as a piece of information and turn it into a piece of content. My wife used to work in house build. She used to always sell houses, and they would always ask the same questions around stamp duty, for example. I still don't quite know the definition of stamp duty. Essentially, I know it's tax. But if that's the questions they're always asking, then that needs to be relayed back to the marketing team to then go and turn that into a piece of content to educate the audience on, if they're first-time buyers, most first-time buyers won't have a clue what stamp duty means, for example. In the middle, what conversations are already happening about our sector or service that don't include us? Now this links with the question below. Where are they happening? Reddit, Facebook groups, social listening, other communities, etc. Even now on LLMs and ChatGPT, etc. What's being talked about in our sector that we're not a part of? How can we either use that as research to go and look on the Reddit forum, on the subreddit of such and such topic, because there's a subreddit for literally everything. How can we use that information, either turn it into content of our own on our website, on our social media platforms, or if we're brave enough and we have the right strategy, go directly into those conversations and start adding value. And obviously Reddit is a strange place at the best of times, but if you can make it work without being too salesy, then you can find real value in it. But those conversations are gold dust for content ideas, but they're all happening, just we're not involved in them as a brand. And the links to that topic as well. What are the topics that are never clearly answered? There's never really a strong definition or an answer to the question. Could we be the people to give that answer? That might be that our product is already doing that, but we're not communicating that to the audience. If you found that information, turn that into content, turn that into could be a LinkedIn post, could be an Instagram post, could be a video, could even be a long form blog with clear sections, so you're giving advice that hopefully might be picked up in the future by an AI, for example. And even if you're going down, with the blue light card examples, as you saw, some of them were humour-based, but only do that if it's right for the audience. But are there any inside jokes? And that doesn't have to be funny things. It could just be like there's always a bit of a inside knowledge or a bit of a wink. That's always something that happens in our sector. Or is there something unique that happens in our audience, in the audience that they reference that we need to play back to them to show we get them? Because if you can show you understand your audience with your content, they're more likely to remember you, and therefore understand that when it comes down to they need to buy a service like yours, you're going to be the one that's at the top of the queue. And obviously there's loads of other questions there, but I think when it comes to it, these are just part of the research process. And this might be you asking customers directly. It might be if you work in a bigger business, talking to business development people or sales teams or whoever it might be. But if you can ask those questions, and you'd be surprised how many don't often get asked when it comes to content, then you've got a really good starting point to creating something interesting and different than just the standard content from the rest of your competitors. And the last one, professional and personal challenges. This might be what goes on in the personal lives of your audience that might impact how they relate to you as a business. So this might be easier to reference when it comes to a clear audience. So we're talking about teachers, for example. We know that there's often people will joke about teachers get tons of holiday, for example. But actually, they also work every hour of the day when they're not on holiday because they're trying to do marketing or something like that. So how do you connect that with your content so you're not just, you get your audience and you show you get them. It's not just a case of you understanding in your head. You have to demonstrate via your content that you understand your audience. So hopefully, once you answer questions like that, there will be others as well. You know, that's not an exhaustive list. It will build a clearer picture of how your community could work. I know it's important to test and learn and test again. If a post fails, don't just think that's the end of that piece of content, it's dead. Did it fail because the format wasn't right? Did you not quite, the hook wasn't very good in the first few seconds? Whatever it might be, you know, retry different things. If you know that's a real problem you're answering in a piece of content, then it might be the format hasn't worked quite right, and how do you do it again? And also remember, don't post and ghost. I shared this with a friend of mine beforehand just to get, you know, I work for myself, so sometimes you have to get external points of view to make sure you're not talking absolute nonsense in a presentation. And she said, we need to make sure this is mentioned because it's all well and good just posting, but if people comment and you're not getting involved, then you're treating it like you're broadcasting back to them and then not creating a conversation. So if you do, when you start getting comments, make sure you as a brand or as a person, don't forget this can still apply to you as individuals. Engage with those comments. You have to engage with every single one if you get loads, but if it starts to show that you get your audience and you're bothered about them because you're taking the time to reply to them. And this stat just proves that, you know, all these channels have higher engagement when you reply to comments, and it sees a major uplift on all of them. Obviously, it varies depending on the type of channel, but the point is, if you engage with your audience, it's great for you as a brand. This comes from Buffer, by the way, which is a social media platform and analytics tool. So, in summary, I truly believe, and hopefully that's come across, the most effective communities are when audience recognise themselves and each other in your content. So with you as a brand or a company acting as a centre point or pivots for conversations, you're not just shouting out to the world, you're trying to be the middleman essentially, and use that to create jumping off points for your audience to talk to you. And as I said at the start, I think this can happen in whatever sector. You know, B2C, sometimes you might have, everyone looks at Ryanair or Aldi and go, oh my God, they're amazing. But they're huge brands with huge budgets. B2B businesses, even very niche ones, if you've got a niche audience, get to know that audience as best you can, because you can be the people who understand them the most. You'll be the ones they want to turn to when they need to buy from you. And as I said, take the time to research and listen to your audience. Don't just assume you know everything. Get them to talk to you and relay their fears or worries or hopes or what they want, or even them to, if they need to, shout at you, and occasionally let them. But the point is, listen to them. And then once you do that, and you're creating content that's working, you'll create a space on social media where audience can clearly see and say to themselves, this is for people like me. And that's essentially what you want from any of your online communities. You want people to understand, recognise the content and think, do you know what, that relates to me because of X, Y, Z. Not just because of who I am as an age, gender or location. It's more because I understand it. I feel something more than just I need that product or I want that product. It's because they get me, and therefore your social media will be much more effective. And that is it for me. Thank you very much for listening. Please scan that if you want to get me on LinkedIn, or just shout at me and grab my connection. But I don't think I've got any questions, and hopefully that made sense. I wasn't speaking to you quickly either.
Any questions for Dave then?
I've got one for you.
Yes, mate.
For a community within a regulatory niche, such
Yep.
as finance, for instance, has quite an emotional pull around it, and people won't really want to comment or post about money. How do they build that community with those types of people?
Yeah, I was thinking about that because I used to work with a client who was a solicitor as well.
Yeah.
And I think to me, the advice is, if you're giving that advice in a meeting and it's public and you can say it, then there's no harm in sharing that online. Putting aside for a minute the fear that we were talking about earlier, about the fears of posting, I think it's that creating an understanding that you think, if this is what I would willingly share in a meeting, and I know it's legally sound or financially sound, then that's still okay. I think it's